My name is Patricia Williams. I'm 52 years old, and I'm sitting in a studio apartment in downtown Phoenix, staring at a bank foreclosure notice that represents the best decision I've ever made. 6 months ago, I owned a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Scottsdale's most prestigious neighborhood. Today, I'm starting over with nothing but my dignity intact, and honestly, I've never felt more free. Let me tell you where this all began, because if you're watching this story unfold wherever you are right now, I want you to hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened to me could happen to anyone who's ever sacrificed everything for their children, only to discover that love doesn't always flow both ways. It was a Tuesday evening in March when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael, my only son, my pride and joy, the boy I'd raised alone after his father walked out when he was 7. Michael, now 28, had been living in my house for 3 years with his girlfriend Sarah, supposedly saving money for their own place. What started as a temporary arrangement had become their permanent residence, and I'd become the unwelcome guest in my own home. Mom. His voice was strained, distant. About Sunday dinner this week. Sarah's not comfortable with you joining us anymore. She thinks it would be better if you made other arrangements. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sunday dinners had been our family tradition for over 2 decades, even during his rebellious teenage years, even when he brought home girlfriends I didn't approve of. We always gathered around my dining room table every Sunday at 6 p.m. sharp. It was sacred time, our time, the one constant in a world that seemed to change too quickly. I don't understand, I managed to whisper, my hands trembling as I gripped the phone. It's my house, Michael. It's our tradition. Yeah, well, things change, he said with a callousness that felt like ice water in my veins. Sarah's pregnant, and stress isn't good for the baby. Your presence makes her uncomfortable. Sarah's pregnancy was news to me. 3 years of them living under my roof, eating my food, using my utilities, and I was learning about my future grandchild through a rejection phone call. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was being banished from my own home to protect the mental health of a woman who'd never shown me anything but cold politeness and barely concealed resentment. When were you planning to tell me about the baby? I asked, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice when Sarah was ready. Look, Mom, this isn't personal. She just needs space right now, and honestly, so do I. We're trying to build our own family, and having you hovering around all the time isn't helping. Hovering. That's what he called my attempts to maintain a relationship with my son in my own home. That's what he called the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to keep him in private school, who'd foregone vacations and new clothes and social opportunities to ensure he had everything he needed. The woman who'd given him the down payment for his first car, who'd co-signed his college loans, who'd welcomed him back home when his entry-level job couldn't cover his student debt and living expenses. I understand, I said quietly, though understanding and accepting were 2 very different things. I'll make other arrangements for Sunday. Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand. But as I hung up the phone that night, sitting alone in the living room of the house I'd bought and paid for, surrounded by furniture I'd chosen and memories I'd created, I realized that understanding something doesn't mean you have to tolerate it. That was the moment everything changed, not just for Sunday dinners, but for the rest of my life. The house that love, built to understand how I ended up being a stranger in my own home. You need to know the story of that house and everything I sacrificed to make it possible. The 4-bedroom colonial in Scottsdale wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was the physical manifestation of every dream I'd ever had about giving my son a better life than the one I'd grown up with. I bought that house in 1998 when Michael was 12, stretching every financial muscle I had to make the down payment. The mortgage consumed 60% of my income as a legal secretary. But I didn't care. Michael needed stability after the chaos of his father's abandonment, and I was determined to give him roots in a community where he could thrive. The house sat on a corner lot with mature oak trees and a backyard large enough for the swing set I installed myself, watching YouTube videos and reading instruction manuals late into the night. I painted every room by hand, choosing colors I thought a growing boy would love. Soft blues for his bedroom, warm yellows for the kitchen where we'd share breakfast before school, deep greens for the living room where we'd watch movies on Friday nights. Every Sunday, I'd prepare elaborate dinners in that kitchen, testing new recipes and setting the dining room table with my grandmother's china. Even when it was just the two of us, I'd light candles and use cloth napkins, teaching Michael that meals were about more than nutrition. They were about connection, tradition, respect for the time we had together. Those Sunday dinners became our anchor. Through Michael's teenage rebellion, his struggles with math that required expensive tutoring, his heartbreak over his first girlfriend, his anxiety about college applications, every challenge was discussed and processed over those carefully prepared meals. The dining room witnessed our most honest conversations, our biggest arguments, our moments of celebration and commiseration. When Michael graduated high school, I refinanced the house to help pay for his college expenses. When he struggled to find work after graduation, I welcomed him home without hesitation. When he asked if Sarah could move in temporarily, I said yes, despite my reservations about a woman who seemed to view kindness as weakness and generosity, as an obligation rather than a gift. Sarah moved in with a single suitcase and an attitude that made it clear she considered my home a stepping stone rather than a sanctuary. She never offered to help with groceries, utilities, or household maintenance. She rearranged my living room furniture without asking, claiming the original setup didn't flow properly. She criticized my cooking, my decorating choices, even the way I folded laundry. But the final straw wasn't her criticism. It was the way she began isolating Michael from me in my own home. Gradually, he stopped joining me for morning coffee before work. He'd eat dinner in their bedroom instead of the kitchen. He'd leave family gatherings early, citing Sarah's discomfort with crowds or her headaches or her need for quiet time. What hurt most was watching my son transform from the thoughtful, communicative young man I'd raised into someone who seemed ashamed of our relationship, embarrassed by the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities his peers took for granted. Sarah had convinced him that my expectations of basic courtesy and inclusion in family decisions were actually forms of manipulation and control. The house that had once been filled with laughter and conversation became a minefield of tension and unspoken resentment. I found myself walking on eggshells in hallways I'd painted, apologizing for existing in spaces I'd bought and furnished, feeling like an intruder in the home that represented 20 years of my hopes and dreams. That Tuesday phone call wasn't just about Sunday dinner. It was about my son choosing his girlfriend's comfort over his mother's dignity, prioritizing the feelings of someone who'd lived in my home for 3 years over the woman who'd built that home with her own hands and heart. The dinner that never was. That first Sunday without dinner was harder than I'd expected. For 23 years, my week had revolved around those sacred gatherings, planning menus, shopping for ingredients, spending Saturday afternoon preparing dishes that would bring us together. Suddenly, I found myself with nowhere to go and nothing to do with the tradition that had defined my identity as a mother. I drove aimlessly around Scottsdale that evening, watching families gather in restaurant windows, seeing children playing in yards while parents prepared meals in brightly lit kitchens. The weight of my isolation felt suffocating, but it was nothing compared to the realization that was slowly dawning. I had become financially and emotionally dependent on being needed by people who no longer wanted me around. When I returned home around 8 o'clock, I could hear laughter coming from the dining room, my dining room around my table, using my grandmother's china. Sarah's voice carried clearly through the walls as she described her pregnancy symptoms to Michael, discussing nursery plans and baby names as if they were the only family that mattered. The irony was devastating. I was listening to conversations about my future grandchild through the walls of my own home, excluded from the very discussions that should have included me most. The following week, Michael approached me with what he clearly thought was a reasonable compromise. "Sarah thinks it might be better if you had dinner plans somewhere else on Sundays," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Maybe you could join a church group or find some friends to eat with. She's really trying to establish our own family traditions, and having you here makes her feel like she's intruding on something that's already established." The audacity was breathtaking. Sarah, who had contributed nothing to the mortgage, utilities, groceries, or maintenance of the home, felt uncomfortable with my presence during the one weekly tradition that had sustained our family for over 2 decades. She wanted to establish her own family traditions in my house, using my dishes, sitting in chairs I'd bought, while I disappeared into the community to find strangers to share meals with. "This is my home, Michael," I said quietly. "These are our family traditions. Sarah is welcome to join them, but she doesn't get to replace them." His response revealed how completely she'd manipulated his perspective. "Mom, you're being selfish. Pregnant women need emotional support, not conflict. Sarah's trying to build something special for our baby, and you're making it about yourself instead of supporting what's best for your future grandchild." Say, that word, selfish, coming from the mouth of the child I devoted my entire adult life to supporting, felt like a knife between my ribs. I was selfish for wanting to maintain traditions in my own home. I was selfish for expecting basic respect from people living rent-free under my roof. I was selfish for hoping to be included in conversations about my grandchild's future. Over the following weeks, the isolation intensified. Michael and Sarah would disappear into their bedroom immediately after work, emerging only to use the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. They began ordering takeout instead of eating meals I'd prepared, claiming Sarah's pregnancy cravings were too specific for regular food. They installed a mini fridge in their bedroom, creating a completely separate living space within my house. The breaking point came 3 weeks later when I returned home from work to find a real estate agent's card tucked under my windshield wiper. Sarah had contacted a realtor about investment properties in the area, supposedly researching their options for when they moved out. But the agent's note was addressed to the homeowner and referenced a potential quick sale consultation. That evening, I confronted them directly. "Are you planning to sell my house?" I asked, holding up the business card. Sarah looked genuinely surprised, but Michael's expression was guilty, defensive. "We were just exploring options," he said. "Sarah thinks this place might be too big for just you once we move out. We thought maybe a smaller place would be more practical, and you could use the equity for retirement or something." The manipulation was so sophisticated it was almost admirable. They'd framed selling my home as concern for my future well-being, suggesting that a house I'd worked 20 years to pay off was somehow impractical for a single woman in her 50s. They'd contacted real estate agents without my knowledge or permission, discussing my property and my future as if I were an elderly relative whose decisions needed to be made by younger, wiser family members. "This is my house," I repeated, but the words felt hollow now, powerless against the systematic campaign to make me feel unwelcome in my own life. "We know, Mom," Michael said with the patronizing tone you'd use with a confused child. "We're just trying to help you think ahead." But I was finally beginning to think clearly for the first time in months. Titi revelation. That changed everything. The truth hit me on a random Thursday morning in May while I was getting ready for work. I was standing in my bathroom, the master bathroom I'd renovated 3 years ago with beautiful ceramic tiles and a walk-in shower, when I heard Sarah on the phone in the bedroom next door. The walls weren't particularly thin, but her voice carried clearly through the shared wall, and what I heard made my blood run cold. "No, Mom, she's not going anywhere," Sarah was saying with a laugh that sounded more like a sneer. "Michael's too guilty to actually kick her out, but I'm making her so uncomfortable she'll eventually leave on her own. It's just a matter of time." I pressed my ear against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid they might hear it. "The Sunday dinner thing was perfect," she continued. "Now she spends every weekend alone, feeling sorry for herself. I'm working on getting her excluded from other family decisions too. By the time the baby comes, she'll be so isolated she'll probably move to some retirement community just to feel wanted somewhere." There was a pause, presumably while her mother responded. Then Sarah's voice again. "The house? Oh, that's the best part. Michael's name isn't on the deed, but once we're married and have the baby, he'll have more leverage. Community property laws, you know. Plus, she's getting older. If something happens to her, everything goes to him anyway. Why pay rent somewhere else when we can just wait it out here?" The casual cruelty in her voice was stunning, but it was nothing compared to the realization that my son was apparently complicit in this long-term manipulation. Everything made sense now. The gradual isolation, the exclusion from family decisions, the sudden concern about whether my house was practical for my future needs. They weren't trying to help me plan for retirement. They were systematically undermining my comfort and confidence in my own home until I'd voluntarily remove myself from their inheritance equation. I stood in that bathroom for another 10 minutes, listening as Sarah outlined her strategy to gradually take over more household decisions, perhaps suggesting I needed help managing finances or home maintenance as I got older. She'd researched Arizona property laws and knew exactly how to position herself and Michael as responsible caregivers, making decisions in my best interest. "The beauty is that she's doing most of the work herself," Sarah said with that same cruel laugh. "She's so desperate to avoid conflict that she just accepts whatever boundaries we set. Pathetic, really." That word, pathetic, describing a woman who'd worked 2 jobs to support her son, who'd sacrificed her own comfort and social life to ensure his success, who'd welcomed his girlfriend into her home despite obvious reservations. I realized I'd been living in a psychological warfare scenario where kindness was interpreted as weakness and boundaries were systematically eroded until I felt like a guest in my own life. But Sarah had made one crucial mistake. She'd revealed her strategy before completing it, and she'd underestimated the woman she was trying to manipulate. I called in sick to work that morning and spent the day researching property laws, estate planning, and my legal rights as a homeowner. I contacted 3 different attorneys and a financial advisor asking detailed questions about asset protection and inheritance planning. By evening, I had a complete picture of my legal standing and several options for protecting myself from exactly the kind of manipulation Sarah had described. The most important discovery was that, as the sole owner of the house, I had absolute authority over who lived there and under what conditions. Michael and Sarah were guests in my home, not tenants with legal rights. I could revoke their invitation to stay at any time, for any reason, without legal justification or advance notice beyond basic human courtesy. That evening at dinner, a meal I ate alone in my kitchen while they ordered pizza to their bedroom, I began planning my response. Not revenge exactly, but justice. A way to reclaim my dignity and my home while teaching two people that manipulation and psychological warfare have consequences. I'd spent months feeling powerless, apologizing for existing, accepting unreasonable boundaries in my own space. But now I understood the game they were playing, and I was ready to play by my own rules. The next morning, I called the bank that held my mortgage and asked about accelerated payment options, taking back my power. The conversation with my mortgage banker, Janet Rodriguez, was eye-opening in ways I hadn't expected. When I explained that I wanted to explore paying off my remaining balance early, she pulled up my account with obvious surprise. "Mrs. Williams, you have an exemplary payment history and only $47,000 remaining on your original loan. With your current equity position, you have several interesting options." Interesting options. That phrase sparked something I hadn't felt in months, hope mixed with a sense of control over my own future. Janet explained that I could either refinance to access my equity, pay off the remaining balance with retirement funds, or consider selling the property to maximize my financial position for the next phase of my life. "The Scottsdale market is particularly strong right now," she said. "Properties in your neighborhood are selling for significantly more than their assessed values. If you're considering downsizing or relocating, this would be an optimal time." That afternoon, I called my attorney, David Chen, who specialized in estate planning and property law. I'd found him through a colleague whose mother had faced similar family manipulation around inheritance issues. "What you're describing is, unfortunately, common," he said after I explained my situation. "Adult children who feel entitled to their parents' assets sometimes engage in systematic campaigns to assume control over property and financial decisions. The key is documenting your mental competency and decision-making capacity while establishing clear boundaries around your assets." David helped me understand something crucial. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for decisions about my own property. As the sole owner, I could sell, rent, or dispose of my house however I chose, regardless of who might be inconvenienced by those decisions. "The fact that your son and his girlfriend are living there doesn't give them any legal rights to the property," he emphasized. "They're guests who can be asked to leave at any time. The emotional complexity doesn't change the legal reality." Over the following week, I quietly began preparing for what I now think of as my liberation. I researched apartment rentals in different parts of Phoenix, looking for places that would offer me a fresh start without the emotional baggage of my current neighborhood. I transferred important documents to a safety deposit box that only I could access. I updated my will to reflect my current circumstances and feelings about family loyalty. Most importantly, I began documenting the systematic exclusion and manipulation I'd been experiencing. Every conversation, every boundary that had been imposed on me in my own home, every instance of being made to feel unwelcome in spaces I'd created and paid for. David had advised me that while I didn't need justification for my property decisions, having a clear record would be helpful if family members later tried to claim I'd acted irrationally or under duress. The documentation process was emotionally brutal but incredibly clarifying. Seeing the pattern of manipulation laid out chronologically made it impossible to minimize or rationalize what had been happening. This wasn't normal family tension or generational differences about privacy and boundaries. This was a calculated campaign to erode my sense of ownership and belonging in my own life. 3 weeks after overhearing Sarah's phone conversation, I made my decision. I would pay off the remaining mortgage balance using funds from my retirement account, then immediately sell the house and relocate to a smaller place where I could rebuild my life without the constant stress of feeling unwelcome in my own home. The beauty of this plan was its simplicity and finality. No negotiations, no family meetings, no attempts to salvage relationships that had become toxic, no explanations or justifications to people who'd demonstrated complete disregard for my feelings and contributions. Just clean, decisive action that would remove me from a situation where my kindness was being weaponized against me. But before I executed this plan, I decided to give Michael one final opportunity to choose a different path, not because I expected him to take it, but because I wanted to know with absolute certainty that I'd exhausted every possibility for rebuilding our relationship on terms that respected my dignity. I asked him to meet me for coffee on a Saturday morning, just the two of us, away from Sarah's influence and the tension of the house. What happened during that conversation would determine whether I proceeded with the nuclear option or tried one last time to rebuild trust between us. The final conversation. Michael agreed to meet me at Desert Bean Coffee, a small cafe we'd frequented when he was in high school. I chose it deliberately, neutral territory, but filled with memories of better times when our relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine affection. I arrived 15 minutes early, ordering my usual vanilla latte and claiming a corner table where we could speak privately. He walked in exactly on time, looking uncomfortable and slightly suspicious. The easy familiarity we'd once shared had been replaced by the polite wariness of acquaintances who weren't quite sure why they were meeting. It broke my heart to see how much distance Sarah had managed to create between us in just 3 years. "Thanks for meeting me," I said as he sat down with his black coffee, a preference he'd developed since Sarah, who considered flavored coffee drinks childish and unsophisticated. "What's this about, Mom?" His tone was cautious but not unkind. "Sarah's worried you're going to try to guilt-trip us about the Sunday dinner thing again." The fact that he couldn't meet with his mother without Sarah's permission and commentary told me everything I needed to know about their relationship dynamic, but I pressed forward with my planned approach. "I wanted to talk to you about our family and what it means to both of us," I said carefully. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about the past few months, and I'm concerned that we're losing something important." He shifted uncomfortably, already defensive. "If this is about Sunday dinner, we already discussed that. Sarah needs to establish her own traditions, and having you there makes her feel like she's intruding on something that doesn't include her. Michael, it's my house, our tradition. She is intruding, but she was welcome to join rather than replace what we'd built together. See, this is what I mean," he said with frustration that seemed genuine. "Everything has to be about what you built, what you created, what you want. Sarah's trying to build something new for our family, and you're making it impossible by clinging to old patterns that don't work anymore." The phrase "old patterns" was pure Sarah. She'd convinced him that our 23-year tradition of family dinners was somehow dysfunctional and needed to be discarded for the health of their relationship. "Tell me about these new patterns," I said quietly. "What traditions is Sarah creating that require my absence?" He looked genuinely confused by the question, as if he'd never actually considered what would replace what we'd lost. "We're going to have our own family traditions, centered around our baby, our needs as a couple." "Such as?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, he said, "It's not about specific activities, Mom. It's about space and autonomy and not feeling like we have to perform family unity for your emotional needs. Perform family unity." That's how Sarah had framed our Sunday dinners, as performances designed to meet my emotional needs rather than genuine connection between family members. She'd managed to recast 23 years of love and tradition as manipulation and control. "Michael," I said gently, "do you remember what Sunday dinners meant to you when you were growing up? What they represented for us as a family?" For a moment, his expression softened, and I saw a glimpse of the boy who used to help me set the table, who'd share stories about his week over carefully prepared meals, who'd once told me that our Sunday dinners made him feel like we were rich, even when money was tight. But the moment passed quickly. "That was different," he said. "I was a kid then. Now I'm trying to build my own family, and I need you to respect that process." "I do respect it," I said. "But respect works both ways, Michael. I've given you and Sarah a home for 3 years, asking for nothing but basic courtesy and inclusion in family decisions that affect me directly. Instead, I'm being systematically excluded from conversations about my grandchild, from traditions I created, from decisions about my own house." His defensiveness flared immediately. "No one's making decisions about your house. We've been completely respectful of your space and your property." This was my opening. "I overheard Sarah's phone conversation last Thursday morning," I said quietly. "The one where she described her strategy for making me so uncomfortable that I'd eventually leave voluntarily." The color drained from his face, but he rallied quickly. "You were eavesdropping on private conversations?" "In my own house, Michael, where she was discussing plans to manipulate me out of my own home so you could inherit it more easily." "That's not—" "She wasn't—" He struggled for words, clearly caught between loyalty to Sarah and the uncomfortable reality of what I'd heard. "Were you aware of her timeline for my removal?" I asked directly. "Her research into community property laws and inheritance planning?" His silence was answer enough. He might not have initiated the manipulation, but he'd been aware of it and chosen to participate rather than protect me from it. "I see," I said sadly. "Well, I wanted to give you the opportunity to choose a different path, to tell me that preserving our relationship mattered more than whatever Sarah has convinced you I'm taking away from your future happiness. Mom, please don't make this into some kind of ultimatum between Sarah and you. That's not fair." "You're right," I agreed. "It's not fair. It's also not necessary." I stood up, gathering my purse and leaving a $10 bill on the table for both our drinks. "I love you, Michael. I always will. But I won't continue to subsidize my own emotional abuse or participate in relationships where my value is measured only by what I can provide to people who have no interest in providing anything back." "What does that mean?" he asked, alarm creeping into his voice. "It means you and Sarah are going to get exactly what you've been working toward," I said. "Complete autonomy and independence from my influence. I hope it brings you everything you're looking for." I walked out of that cafe knowing I'd never see my son the same way again, but also knowing I'd given him every possible chance to choose love and respect over manipulation and entitlement. His choice told me everything I needed to know about proceeding with my plan. The decision that set me free. Monday morning, I walked into Desert Financial Credit Union with my retirement account statements and a cashier's check for $47,000. Janet Rodriguez had prepared all the paperwork for early mortgage payoff, and the transaction took less than 30 minutes. After 22 years of monthly payments, I owned my house free and clear. The feeling was surreal, liberating, and terrifying simultaneously. For the first time in my adult life, I had no mortgage payment, no debt tied to my shelter, no monthly obligation that could be threatened or leveraged against me. The house was mine completely, which meant the decision about what to do with it was mine completely as well. That afternoon, I called Rebecca Martinez, the real estate agent whose card Sarah had left under my windshield wiper. The irony was too perfect to resist. I would use Sarah's own research to execute my liberation plan. Mrs. Williams, I'm so glad you called, Rebecca said enthusiastically. I've been hoping to connect with you about your beautiful property. The market is incredible right now, especially in your neighborhood. I'm interested in discussing a quick sale, I told her. What would be the fastest timeline for listing and closing? How quickly are you hoping to move? With the right pricing strategy, we could have offers within a week and close within 30 days. Is this a relocation situation? Yes, I said simply. I'm ready for a fresh start somewhere new. Rebecca scheduled an appointment to view the property and discuss pricing strategy. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, excitement about my future rather than dread about my present circumstances. That evening, I researched one-bedroom apartments in different Phoenix neighborhoods, looking for places that would represent a completely different lifestyle from my current situation. I found a beautiful apartment complex in the Arts District downtown with a community garden, fitness center, and frequent social events for residents. The rent was less than half what my mortgage payment had been, leaving me with significant monthly savings plus the proceeds from the house sale to secure my financial future. Over the next few days, I quietly began sorting through 20 years of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep for my new life and what to discard or donate. The process was emotionally challenging but remarkably clarifying. So many items I'd held onto just in case or for sentimental reasons that no longer resonated with who I was becoming. Michael and Sarah seemed to sense that something had changed, though they didn't know what. Michael made several attempts at casual conversation, asking about my weekend plans and commenting on my unusually upbeat mood. Sarah watched me with suspicious eyes, as if trying to determine whether I was planning some kind of retaliation for the phone conversation she didn't know I'd overheard. Rebecca's property evaluation exceeded my expectations. The house would likely sell for $380,000, giving me approximately $330,000 after commissions and fees, more than enough to secure a comfortable apartment, furnish it completely, and establish a substantial emergency fund while maintaining my retirement savings untouched. The key will be staging and presentation, Rebecca explained as we walked through each room. This house shows beautifully, but we want to minimize personal items and maximize the sense of space and possibility for potential buyers. As she spoke, I imagined Michael and Sarah's reaction to discovering their long-term inheritance plan dissolving into moving boxes and real estate signs. The house they'd assumed would eventually become theirs, that Sarah had researched and planned around, would instead become someone else's home, while I used the proceeds to build a life free from their manipulation and entitlement. But the most satisfying part wasn't the financial freedom or even the poetic justice. It was the realization that I was choosing myself, my dignity, my peace of mind, my right to live without walking on eggshells or apologizing for existing in my own space. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what would make me happy, rather than what would avoid conflict with people who demonstrated no consideration for my happiness. Friday afternoon, I signed the listing agreement. The house would go on the market the following Tuesday, with showings beginning immediately. Rebecca estimated we'd have multiple offers within the first week, given the location and condition of the property. That weekend, I began the process of telling Michael and Sarah about my decision, not asking for their permission or input, not seeking their approval or understanding, just informing them of changes that would affect their living situation. For the first time in our relationship, I would be setting the terms and timeline instead of accommodating theirs. The announcement that changed everything I chose. Sunday evening to tell them, which felt symbolically appropriate, our former sacred family time, now repurposed for the conversation that would end their comfortable manipulation of my generosity. Michael and Sarah were in the living room watching Netflix when I knocked on the doorframe to get their attention. "I have something important to discuss with you both," I said, maintaining the calm, measured tone I'd been practicing all weekend. Sarah muted the television with obvious irritation. "What is it?" she asked in the voice you'd use with a child interrupting adult activities. "I've put the house on the market," I said simply. "It goes live on Tuesday, with the first showing scheduled for Wednesday and Thursday." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language, while Sarah's expression shifted rapidly from confusion to alarm to anger. "What do you mean you put the house on the market?" Michael finally asked. "I mean, I've listed it for sale with a real estate agent. I paid off the mortgage last week and I've decided to sell and relocate to something more suitable for my current needs." "You paid off the mortgage?" Sarah's voice was sharp with accusation. "With what money?" "My money," I replied evenly. "From my retirement account. The house is now owned free and clear, which makes the sale process much simpler." Michael was shaking his head slowly, as if trying to process information that didn't compute. "Mom, you can't just sell the house without talking to us first. We live here. We have rights." "Actually, you don't," I said gently but firmly. "You're guests in my home, and while I've appreciated your company, I'm ready to move on to the next phase of my life." Sarah stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "This is insane. You can't just kick us out with no notice. I'm pregnant, for God's sake." "I'm giving you notice now," I said. "The closing will probably happen in about 30 days, so you have a month to find alternative housing. That should be plenty of time to locate something suitable." "A month?" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Mom, we haven't saved enough for a down payment yet. We can't just find a place and move in a month." "Then you'll need to rent," I said, "or ask Sarah's family for help." "But my decision is final." Sarah was pacing now, her hands clenched into fists. "This is about Sunday dinner, isn't it? You're selling our home because you're mad about not being included in one meal a week?" Our home. The phrase was telling. In Sarah's mind, my house had already become theirs, my decision-making authority already transferred to their comfort and convenience. "This isn't about Sunday dinner," I said truthfully. "This is about me choosing to live somewhere I feel welcome and respected." "We respect you," Michael protested. "We've never been disrespectful." I looked at him sadly. Even now, even faced with the consequences of their behavior, he couldn't acknowledge the systematic exclusion and manipulation that had characterized our interactions for months. "Michael, when was the last time you asked my opinion about anything? When was the last time you included me in a conversation about your future plans? When was the last time you treated me like family instead of an inconvenient landlord in my own home?" He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, unable to provide examples that would contradict my point. Sarah, however, was just getting started. "You can't do this to us," she screamed. "I'm carrying your grandchild. You're destroying your own family over petty grievances." "I'm not destroying anything," I said calmly. "I'm simply choosing not to subsidize my own emotional abuse anymore. You'll still be family. You'll just be family who lives somewhere else." "Emotional abuse?" Michael's voice was incredulous. "Mom, that's completely unfair. We've never abused you. You've excluded me from family decisions, banned me from family traditions, discussed plans for inheriting my property, while researching ways to manipulate me into leaving, and consistently prioritized the comfort of someone who's lived here 3 years over the woman who built this home over 20 years. If that's not abuse, it's certainly not love or respect." Sarah's face went white. She knew I'd overheard her phone conversation, but she'd been hoping I hadn't understood its implications or wouldn't act on what I'd learned. "You were eavesdropping," she accused, as if that were the real crime in this situation. "I was getting ready for work in my own bathroom," I corrected. "You were planning my emotional manipulation in the next room. The problem isn't that I heard your strategy, it's that you had one." Michael looked between us, clearly realizing there was context he'd missed. "What phone conversation?" I could have explained, could have detailed Sarah's calculated plan to make me so uncomfortable I'd voluntarily remove myself from their inheritance equation. But what was the point? He'd chosen her over me repeatedly for 3 years. One more revelation wouldn't change his fundamental priorities. "It doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that I'm moving on to a life where I don't have to wonder whether the people around me actually want me there." The next hour involved a lot of arguing, pleading, and emotional manipulation as they tried various strategies to change my mind. Sarah cried about the stress affecting her pregnancy. Michael appealed to my love for him and my future grandchild. They both suggested I was having some kind of breakdown or midlife crisis that was causing me to make irrational decisions. But I'd spent weeks preparing for these arguments, and none of them moved me. My decision wasn't emotional or reactive. It was carefully considered and completely rational. I was removing myself from a toxic situation and using my financial freedom to create a better life. By the time they went to bed that night, the reality was sinking in. Their comfortable arrangement was ending, and no amount of guilt or manipulation would change that outcome. New beginnings and old endings. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of showings, offers, and gradually escalating family drama. Rebecca had been right about the market. We received 4 offers within the first 5 days, 3 of them above asking price. I accepted an offer from a young couple with pre-approved financing who could close in 25 days, giving Michael and Sarah exactly 1 month from my original announcement to find new housing. Watching them scramble to locate an apartment was both satisfying and heartbreaking. Satisfying because they were finally experiencing the consequences of taking my generosity for granted. Heartbreaking because I could see how unprepared they were for the realities of independent adult life. 3 years of free housing had left them with minimal savings and unrealistic expectations about what they could afford. Sarah's family proved to be as self-centered as she was. They offered emotional support and plenty of advice, but no financial assistance for deposits or moving expenses. Michael's father, who'd been absent from his life for over 20 years, suddenly reappeared with offers to help that came with conditions and expectations Michael wasn't prepared to meet. Meanwhile, I was experiencing something I hadn't felt in years, pure excitement about my future. The downtown apartment I'd chosen was everything I dreamed of: modern, efficient, surrounded by art galleries and restaurants, and people who'd chosen urban living over suburban isolation. I could walk to work, to the grocery store, to cultural events and social activities that would introduce me to communities beyond the narrow circle of Michael's approval. The furniture I ordered was completely different from the traditional pieces I'd accumulated over decades of trying to create a proper family home. Clean lines, bold colors, pieces chosen for my taste alone rather than their appropriateness for hosting family gatherings that no longer happened anyway. I felt like I was decorating my authentic self rather than performing the role of the perfect mother and homemaker. 2 weeks before closing, Michael made one final attempt to change my mind. He appeared at my office on a Wednesday afternoon, looking desperate and defeated in a way that reminded me painfully of the little boy who used to come to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings. "Mom, please," he said, his voice breaking slightly. We found an apartment, but it's so small, and the neighborhood isn't safe for Sarah and the baby. Can't we work something out? Maybe we could pay rent, contribute to utilities, help with maintenance. The offers he was making were exactly what I'd hoped for 3 years ago when they first moved in. Financial contribution, shared responsibility, mutual respect for the household. But it was too little, too late, motivated by desperation rather than genuine appreciation for what I'd provided. Michael, where were these offers when I asked for basic courtesy and inclusion? I said gently. Where was this consideration when you banned me from Sunday dinner or excluded me from conversations about my grandchild? We made mistakes, he admitted, but we can fix them. We can start over. No, I said sadly, we can't. Trust, once broken, can't be repaired by promises to do better next time. It has to be rebuilt through consistent actions over time, and I'm not willing to risk more emotional damage while waiting to see if you're capable of changing. He left my office that day looking smaller and younger than he had in years, and part of me wanted to comfort him the way I had when he was a child facing consequences he didn't understand. But the larger part of me, the part that had learned self-respect and boundary setting over the past month, knew that rescuing him from the natural results of his choices would only perpetuate the cycle that had brought us to this point. The closing went smoothly. Michael and Sarah moved out 3 days before the sale was finalized, leaving behind a house that felt hollow and strange without their presence, but also peaceful in a way it hadn't been for years. I walked through the empty rooms one final time, remembering the dreams I'd had when I first bought the place and acknowledging how different my actual family life had been from those early hopes. But I wasn't mourning what I'd lost. I was celebrating what I'd gained: financial freedom, emotional independence, and the knowledge that I could make difficult decisions and survive their consequences. At 52, I was starting over completely, and for the first time in decades, the possibilities felt limitless rather than constrained by other people's expectations and demands. My last night in the house, I ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor of my empty living room, toasting my future with a glass of wine from a bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion. This felt special enough. The night before, I stopped being the woman who sacrificed everything for people who took her for granted and became the woman who chose herself instead. 6 months later, living authentically. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my downtown Phoenix apartment, looking out at city lights instead of suburban lawns, and I can honestly say I've never been happier. The woman who was afraid to set boundaries, who apologized for existing in her own space, who measured her worth by how much she could provide to ungrateful family members, that woman feels like a stranger to me now. My apartment is exactly what I wanted: efficient, modern, filled with light and possibility. The walls are painted in colors I chose because they make me happy, not because they're appropriate for family gatherings. The furniture is comfortable and stylish, selected for my enjoyment rather than its durability for other people's children and pets. Every object in this space reflects my authentic preferences rather than my performance of perfect motherhood. The building's community has been a revelation. I've made friends with neighbors who chose me for my company rather than my utility, who include me in their plans because they enjoy my presence rather than needing my resources. We have wine nights and book clubs and group fitness classes, and nobody questions whether I deserve to be there or makes me feel like an intrusion on their more important relationships. Michael calls occasionally, usually when he needs something: advice about the baby, help understanding insurance paperwork, emotional support when Sarah's mood swings become overwhelming. I listen and offer what guidance I can, but I no longer rearrange my life to solve problems he's perfectly capable of handling himself. The boundaries I've established aren't punitive, they're protective. I love my son, but I no longer confuse love with enabling or support with self-sacrifice. Sarah gave birth to a healthy daughter 3 months ago. I met my granddaughter once, briefly, in a coffee shop neutral territory meeting that felt more like a diplomatic negotiation than a family gathering. She's beautiful, and I hope she grows up understanding that love shouldn't require someone to diminish themselves for another person's comfort. The financial benefits of selling the house have exceeded my expectations. The investment returns from my proceeds have created passive income that supplements my salary, giving me security I never had when most of my money went to mortgage payments and household expenses for people who contributed nothing to those costs. I'm actually saving money each month now, building wealth for my own future rather than subsidizing other people's lifestyles. But the emotional benefits have been even more significant. I sleep well at night, wake up looking forward to my day, make social plans without worrying about other people's approval or convenience. I've started taking art classes, joined a hiking group, begun learning Spanish, activities I never had time for when my entire identity revolved around being available for other people's needs. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd set boundaries earlier, if I'd required respect and reciprocity from the beginning, instead of hoping that unconditional giving would eventually generate unconditional love. But regret feels pointless now. The experiences that brought me to this point were necessary for learning who I am when I'm not performing caretaking roles for people who take my efforts for granted. 3 weeks ago, I got a text from Michael saying they were struggling financially and asking if I could co-sign for a car loan. I texted back that I wasn't available for financial assistance but wished them well in finding other solutions. He responded with anger and accusations that I'd become selfish and cold, that I was punishing his daughter for his mistakes. The old me would have been devastated by his criticism, would have second-guessed my boundaries and probably ended up co-signing the loan to prove I wasn't the terrible person he was describing. The new me recognized manipulation masquerading as family obligation and felt nothing but relief that I was no longer vulnerable to those tactics. I'm sharing this story not to encourage anyone to cut ties with family members, but to demonstrate that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in relationships that require you to minimize yourself for other people's comfort. Sometimes the kindest choice is establishing boundaries that protect your dignity and well-being, even when other people interpret those boundaries as cruelty or abandonment. If you're watching this from a situation where you feel unappreciated, taken for granted, or systematically excluded from relationships you've invested everything in maintaining, I want you to know that you have options. You don't have to accept disrespect or manipulation just because it comes from family members or people you love. You deserve relationships based on mutual care and consideration. And if those don't exist in your current life, you have the power to create them elsewhere. The house I lost became the freedom I gained. The family relationships that ended made space for friendships that nourish me. The financial security I thought I was providing for others became the foundation for my own independent future. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the first step toward finding everything you actually need. So whether you're dealing with entitled family members, manipulative relationships, or simply the realization that you've been giving more than you've been receiving, remember this: you have the right to choose yourself. You have the authority to set boundaries that protect your peace of mind. And you have the power to create a life where your value isn't measured by what you can provide to people who don't appreciate your efforts. That's what real love looks like. Not endless self-sacrifice, but healthy relationships between people who respect each other's autonomy and contribute equally to each other's well-being. If the people in your life can't offer that kind of love, you deserve to find people who can. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about choosing self-respect over family obligation. And remember, you're never too old to start over and never too invested in toxic relationships to walk away when they stop serving your highest good. Your future self is waiting for you to choose her. Make sure you do.